Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone, wherever you are connecting from. Max Lobo here, CEO and co-founder of Forward Fooding. Thank you for joining again the second edition of our series of webinars in partnership with the UAE FoodTech Challenge. Tonight we have a very exciting panel of founders joining us. But before we kickstart the conversation, I'll talk you through the flow very briefly. I will give a very brief introduction about Forward Fooding before passing it over to the FoodTech Challenge team to tell you about the competition and the organizations behind it. And then Anne Lemore is with me today. Will be moderating this very exciting panel to come. So very briefly, a few words about Forward Fooding for the ones who don't know what we do. Our main objective is to generate connections within the AgriFoodTech ecosystem. So we are network enablers, and our objective is to scale impactful innovation by connecting startups, corporates, investors, accelerators, and players like the FoodTech Challenge to enable connections in the ecosystem. How we do it? Mostly doing three things. The first one, and I would say about 60–70% of what we do, is doing consulting for corporate clients of the food industry. So working with the open innovation and R&D teams of the likes of Cargill, General Mills, Nestle, Danone, and other organizations, but also working with VCs and institutional investors to help them understand the agri-food tech sector in terms of trends, in terms of market dynamics, what startups are doing in the sector, and how innovation is shaping up in the sector. So the idea is to help them understand the space and make connections. So we're here to help them bridge this gap. The second part of our business is around data. We've been helping building a FoodTech Data Navigator, which is our smart database aggregating a number of agri-foodtech startups globally, counting now more than 7,000 companies all across the supply chain and across a vast range of technologies. Our clients have access to this platform, and this is the tool that we use on a daily basis to do consulting and scouting. And last but not least, the last angle of our business is around startup network. Our core activity here, and something you probably have seen, is the FoodTech 500 competition that we've been running for the past 3 years now, which is with the idea of building the Fortune 500 of FoodTech. So over the past 3 editions of this competition, we've been receiving more than 5,000 applications from startups globally, and the idea is to build this ranking of impactful companies and give them visibility. We also have food innovation hubs in London, Barcelona, and Milan, where part of our team is based alongside a number of agri-foodtech entrepreneurs, and the idea here is to help them scale as well. Now, in terms of footprints, currently we work with more than 30 plus corporate clients. We have more than 7,000 companies in our database, 20 plus companies in our hubs, and have more than 19,000 subscribers in our database, including more than 14,000 entrepreneurs, which is why we're also working with companies like the FoodTech Challenge to help them reaching out and to entrepreneurs and gathering applications for the challenge. And here are a few of the partners and clients and organizations that we've been working with for the past almost 7 years now. So without further ado, if you have any questions about Forward Fooding, you can visit our website or send us a note at info@forwardfooding.com. And I'm now passing over to Aytunç, who is going to tell you more about the FoodTech Challenge.
Thank you, Max. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Aytunç Güler. I'm a part of the FoodTech Challenge team at Tamkeen, and I'm leading on outreach and partnerships. So for the next 10 minutes, I'll take you through the FoodTech Challenge and provide information about the competition, the prize, and share some key how-tos. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll do our best to reply to them after the presentation. We can, next slide, Max. Yeah. Next slide. So the FoodTech Challenge is a global competition with a total prize pool of $2 million. And we're seeking the next wave of innovations that can transform food and ag practices efficiently and, of course, sustainably. We as Tamkeen co-deliver the challenge with our 2 main partners, the UAE Ministry of Climate Change and Environment, and Aspire, which is Abu Dhabi's technology wayfinder. Next slide. At FoodTech Challenge, we're focused on increasing food production and reducing food loss and waste. So on food production, the reasons why the UAE might be interested in sparking innovation in this area might be obvious, but you'll see them on the left-hand side: limited arable land, freshwater scarcity, and of course, a very hot climate. At the same time, we have a very clear and visionary target, which is to increase the total food production in the country by 60%. And the National Food Security Strategy has more specific targets around increasing yield through technology by 30% and increasing production of strategic food items by 15%. Our second pillar is another critical area for the UAE. And in some ways, as a function of the UAE's high standards of living and level of economic development, it means there is an opportunity to reduce the quite high per capita levels of waste, which you'll see on the right-hand side. And here too, we have a clear and visionary target to reduce all food loss and waste by 50% by 2030, so within the next less than 10 years. In terms of eligibility, FoodTech Challenge is a global competition and will accept early stage startup submissions from any country. When we say early stage, we mean startups that have a workable minimum viable product that they can demonstrate both as part of the competition and also to our various investors, partners, and stakeholders here in the UAE. We're also looking for startups that haven't yet gone through Series A funding or the roughly equivalent level in whatever your home country might be. Those that have been in operation for less than 5 years with no more than 25 employees. I understand that these criteria might seem a bit specific. So if you have any questions about your eligibility, our email address is info@foodtechchallenge.com. We'll be more than happy to understand your situation and give you some steer as to whether you're eligible or not. So please feel free to reach out. Next slide. As the FoodTech Challenge, we're very proud to be supported by key stakeholders in the UAE. From sector experts to innovation accelerators. These partnerships are critical for our impact and success, and we're committed to mobilizing the full UAE ecosystem to ensure all of the winners, finalists, and even participants that come through our competition have access to the resources, the information, and the support that they need to have a soft landing here in the UAE. You'll see that our track partners are ADQ and Silal for food production, and Emirates Foundation and Crown Prince Court for food loss and waste. Our enablement partners is a growing list and include Catalyst. As you'll see, it's offering its acceleration support to our winners and finalists. Abu Dhabi Global Market, which is an international financial center here, offering registration support. Khalifa Fund is an advisory platform for entrepreneurs that will be offering mentorship. And Abu Dhabi Residence Office, which supports the thriving international community in the UAE, and it will provide golden visas and various other support schemes. Next slide. In terms of the prize, next slide, it's fundamentally, next slide, Max. Thank you. It's fundamentally designed to set up promising startups for success in the UAE. As you'll see, FTC is focused on particular challenges that we face here in the UAE. So we want to incubate solutions here that can then scale and expand to other parts of the world. However, it is important to say that UAE impact and strategic priorities are very global at the same time and do have a wide-reaching application all over the world. In terms of why UAE as a launchpad for growing and scaling your ideas, on the right-hand side, you'll see that there are a number of unique factors that make the UAE very well positioned. We have a target to be the #1 most food secure nation in the world by 2051. And more fundamentally, innovation is really vital in the UAE and deeply embedded in its DNA, as some of you might already know. The country is also supported by great infrastructure, and of course, it is at a strategic location at the crossroads of the world. Next slide. So some more details on the FTC prize pool. We plan to award 4 winners who will split a total prize of $2 million. The cash portion of the prize is $400,000, which will be paid in 2 installments, as you see on the left-hand side. The remaining core element of the prize is $1.6 million in cash and in other in-kind support. And by those, we mean cash grants to support innovation and R&D, startup acceleration support, manufacturing facilities, incorporation support, visa support, mentorship opportunities, and so on. So it's a huge prize pool comprised of various different elements that we hope will help our winners and finalists. Next slide. You'll see here the process by which we will award the winners, along with a list of our judges. So the participants will basically go through a basic screening process in the beginning to determine the completeness of their submission and if they're eligible or not. Then there will be a technical and commercial evaluation of the business case and demo videos. Then the shortlisted applicants will be interviewed by our partners, either in person here in the UAE or virtually, to select the top 20 submissions. And then finally, our finale judges will select the 4 winners. A couple of words on how to. So here you will see the timeline for the FoodTech Challenge. The 2 key deadlines at the moment are May 20 and June 24. The first one is the early submission deadline, and the second one is the regular submission deadline. And I will explain what those mean in the next slide, but we expect to award the winners in November of this year. So the applicants basically have 2 options or pathways through which they can apply. We're calling option 1 early submission, and this is recommended if you're unsure of your eligibility or would like to get feedback on your submissions. In this option, you will submit the application form and a short overview of your proposal that we're calling executive summary. Then the FTC evaluators will determine your eligibility, and you will be notified in early June if you're eligible and if you made the cut. You can also receive feedback on your application form if relevant. In this case, you will have until June 24 to reflect any changes and submit your supporting information like the business case and demo video. The second option is called regular submission, and this is more suitable for startups that have all the information required. They're familiar with the food and agriculture sectors in the UAE, and they're sure about their eligibility for the challenge. The deadline for this is also June 24, and you'll be asked to submit the full application form and all your supporting information, including a detailed business case, a demo video, and so on. If you choose the regular submission option, I should mention you will not be able to receive feedback from the evaluators. So this is obviously up to you, and all applications need to be completed in English. In terms of applying to the FoodTech Challenge, it's a fairly straightforward and simple process. You'll need to visit our website at foodtechchallenge.com, where you'll see an apply button located in the top right corner. This will let you access the application portal through which you can fill in your details, register your account, and submit your application within the same portal. I just want to point out that you can access and complete your application at any time before June 24. So you can start your application today, save it, and submit it later. And finally, please do feel free to engage with us on our website, on our social media channels, on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and subscribe to our monthly newsletter on our website. It's a very good newsletter that we send out every month. We hope you'll consider applying if this sounds like it would be of interest to you. If not, please feel free to spread the word in your networks with your colleagues, with your friends about the FoodTech Challenge, and encourage them to apply as well. We're really looking forward to engaging with all of you today on the call. And with that, I'd like to pass it back to Max. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aytun.
Thank you, Max.
And now I'm passing over to our moderator for the evening, Anne Lemore. How are you?
Hi, Max. Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Anne Lemore. I'm a food champion for the United Nations, but also the co-founder of Chef for the Planet, which is an international community of chefs dedicated to promote sustainable eating and sustainable gastronomy. And I also collaborate as an advisor with Forward Fooding. So I'm really delighted to be with all of you and such distinguished Agtech and FoodTech leaders for our second second webinar in a series of 3 webinars focusing on food, agriculture, innovation, and sustainability, with a particular focus on the UAE and the MENA region. Today, we will talk about alternative protein. And as Aytun mentioned, when he presented the FoodTech challenges, he mentioned why it was so important to focus, and indeed why it was necessary for the UAE to look at food waste and food loss issues and increase food production and focus on food security. Before we dive into the solutions and innovations with our speakers, I just thought to frame our conversation, it would be interesting to make a couple of general comments. The first one, I wanted to zoom out of the Middle East to the global level. You may have seen the latest United Nations IPCC report, which was published last month and which is entitled Climate Change 2022, Impacts, Adaptation and Vulnerability. And the report states in no uncertain terms, in a scientific language with high confidence, and I'm quoting, that climate change will increasingly put pressure on food production and access, especially in vulnerable regions, undermining food security and nutrition. And if we add to climate change other global phenomena such as demographics, such as pandemics, wars of the kind that we are sadly witnessing in Europe over the last weeks, we know that in the foreseeable future, we will be faced with very serious issues of disruption of production, disruption of food supply chain, famine and hunger on a large scale. The second global point I wanted to make is that not only is global warming putting pressure on food production and access, but our current intensive agriculture practices, our current food systems, is also massively contributing to climate change, biodiversity loss, and the depletion of our natural resources, especially water. I know that most of you will be familiar with those issues, but maybe just to mention two facts. Our current intensive agriculture and food systems are producing globally 1/3 of our greenhouse gas emissions and responsible for the use of 70% of the usage of fresh water. And this is mainly to feed animals. Obviously, the system is unsustainable. Obviously, we need to reduce our carbon footprint, we need to reduce our environment footprint, our water footprint. And this is where innovation and tech and the search for alternative protein come into play and why it is so important. The last point I wanted to mention, and zooming back into the Middle East and the United Arab Emirates, is that if we look at that regions and the Gulf countries, they import between 80 and 90% of their food consumption. Now, if we think about the different options to meet food security in that regions, given the current global situation, which I've just mentioned, obviously there are a couple of options. One is to beef up investments in overseas production assets. The second option is to invest in secure sources of supply. And the third one is really to invest in innovation, invest in local production to increase it. So without further ado, I would now like to start our discussion with our distinguished speakers. It is meant, I will first do a round of introduction with our four speakers, but then this is really a conversation. So all of you who are registered and who are with us this morning or this afternoon, please feel free to ask your questions on the chat function, and Max and I and others in the Forward Fooding team will make sure to channel the discussions to our speakers. So welcome everyone. Max, I'm not sure whether we can see them. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you are. Sorry. So perhaps the first question to Guy. Guy, you are the CFO at MeaTech, which is a deep tech food company. I believe you're currently in Israel. Could you tell us a little bit more about your company and what it is doing and your journey? Guy, I think you're on mute. Sorry. Welcome.
Yep, and thank you, Anne, and first thank you all for making this happen. It's very exciting to be here with the Forward Fooding and this conference. Thank you for the opportunity. Yes, MeaTech. MeaTech was founded in 2019, so it's relatively a young company operating in the field of cultured meat, which in a very very high level, it's taking the animal out of the equation while offering real meat solution to the end customer, if you will, growing meat in the lab without any pain or minimal harm to the animals and so on. The company is still today the only company that is publicly listed, which is dedicated in this field, the cultured meat space. We have a subsidiary in Belgium, which we acquired in late 21, operating in avian meat, meaning producing cultured chicken fat or also foie gras, cultured foie gras. And here in Israel, we are working on bovine cell lines, meaning cows. So producing from stem cells, producing muscle and fat. And we also have a very unique capabilities in this space, which is the 3D printing, which allows us basically to, once we have cultured the biomass and produced it, we can also then print it and layer the structure and compose the steak or the whole cut product out of it. So the company today, to date, has raised about $55 million, all in all. As I said, we're listed on NASDAQ, ticker is MITC. We are about 60 employees all in all, 45 in Israel, another 15 in Belgium. We are among the few companies that are starting to grow into pilot scale production facilities, which we can talk on later. And my personal journey is actually that I joined, my background is investment banking, which I've been doing for the past 10, 12 years before joining MeaTech as the CFO. I joined because I like the cause. I think that you know, everything we touched on, whether it's sustainability or also just the harming animals or taking that out, it's something that I personally relate to. And I think that the cause is worth it. Also think that when I joined the CFO role is because MeaTech was already a public company and we wanted to uplist to NASDAQ and we had the M&A. So I felt that this is a situation where I can bring my investment banking capabilities into practice. And I feel very fortunate to join the company. I think there's exciting things ahead of us in this industry and for us specifically.
Thank you so much, Guy. I would like now to welcome and pass on the floor to Miguel. Miguel, I think you're usually based in London, but right now you're in Argentina. You're the CFO of Eternal. Please tell us a bit more about your company and your journey.
Yeah, hello, Jan. How are you? There are some similarities to what Guy was presenting. My background originally is from investment banking. When I have been living in London for the last 20 years, although I was born and raised in Argentina. So for me, I mean, starting from an entrepreneurial starting point, journeying through a couple of countries and then going back to startups was a full circle and a quite interesting one. So I think the perspective that I have being both sides of a gun in terms of investment helped me to help startups like Eternal into what is the journey from growing from a project into a potential opportunity and from the opportunity into a real business. And again, I think similar to what Guy was saying, something that is very exciting for me is that we're working with a purpose. This is not a company where the main focus is to drive returns for investors. Of course, that's a duty that as part of the directors I have to. But in addition to that, there's a bigger goal, I think, which is to make sure that we can deliver the what we see as the future of food. And what I mean by that is that we can deliver good quality ingredients, a product that people will be proud of, that people want to include into their new recipes, and something that is accessible to everyone worldwide, not something that becomes a fashionable product on Silicon Valley, but something that we can use to ensure that you have good nutrition all over the world. So with those values, it makes it a lot easier to get up every morning and just going through the painful process of growing a startup. So yeah, I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you, Miguel. From Argentina, now moving to Dubai, where Guido is. Guido, you're not the CFO, you're the CSO of PROTe-IN, and I believe you mentioned it was an important distinction for you. Can you tell us what PROTe-IN is about?
Hello, everybody, and thank you, Anne, for the space in this incredibly important webinar. I think this is a space that is evolving very fast, and for all the good reasons that you started mentioning, the food manufacturing industry is getting to a tipping point where it's demonstrating that it's not sustainable anymore with traditional methodology. We will be 10 billion people in 20 years. And the arable land will grow only 5%, while the amount of nutrients that we need would need to grow 70%. So it's very explicit that we need to develop new technology to solve the nutritional issues, and probably doing this not only in a sustainable way, but in an affordable way to feed the world and the countries that now are not even seeing all the marvelous development that we will discuss tonight, because a continent like Africa is out of the picture at this stage in terms of go-to-market strategies or development with the consumer strategy, and we need to do more on that front. I come from a consulting background. I was managing director in Accenture Interactive in Central Europe, and I see and witness all the revolution for all my clients and in the space of industrial technology and food manufacturing. So CSO for me, it is an alternative role to CEO. I'm happy to be co-founder with three incredible co-founders coming from different backgrounds: food manufacturing, industrial technology, and food tech and fermentation science. And we don't believe in PROTe-IN to have a CEO, because there are so many components that runs in parallel in launching a food tech company today, that seeing this only from the angle of finance or go-to-market strategy or science can be short-sighted for us. So I'm happy to step down, from a CEO traditional role into Chief Strategy Officer, because I think the main key today would be developing together with regulators and governmental bodies the new legislation that is really needed in terms of proactively proposing go-to-market possibilities for these new products, and as well to understanding what consumers are able to accept at this stage, because we will propose new possibilities. At PROTe-IN, we develop alternative protein, collagen, and other edible material out of microbial fermentation through continuous fermentation with CO2. So clearly, there's no yet a regulation framework for us to sell the product to consumer at this stage or put it on the shelf. There is so much that we can do as well to support the other fields of alternative protein, like plant-based or cell cultivation. And clearly, we need this framework, and we need the open discussion with the market and with the consumers, also with food manufacturers that are shifting massively their production towards alternative nutrients. And this is very important from a sustainability standpoint, from a price point possibility, and also for actually all the improvements that we can deliver in terms of texture, flavors, and other possibilities. So we are in stealth mode, so-called. So that's why you don't see a website. There is a video that we presented at Expo in February during the Food for Future workshop and events. And we are very concentrating now on the industrial scale up after 5 years of stealth mode, more or less. We incorporated in Italy in December 2020, and we're about to launch the operations in the UAE for all the good reason that I too as well depicted at the beginning with the Food Tech Challenge. The UAE are a fundamental space to accelerate this change. We believe that Israel and Singapore are clearly still the two more advanced geographies to advance food technology and particular alternative protein. But I think the UAE and Dubai can really push the envelope on so many fronts because of the ambitious plan of the global strategy, food security for 2051. And so we're very proud to launch soon the operations in FoodTech Valley here in Dubai. It will be an industrial plant to manufacture alternative protein out of microbial fermentation with CO2. And in Italy, we will maintain the IP company and the development of know-how and patents related to software, hardware, and food applications.
Thank you, Guido. You mentioned plant-based protein, so I would like to now go to our last speaker for a quick introduction. Lana, welcome. You're the CSO of InnovoPro, which is protein ingredient made out of chickpea. Can you tell us what you do?
Correct. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present InnovoPro and our chickpea revolution, as you like to call it. My CSO acronym stands for Chief Science and Sustainability Officer, so it's a little bit different. And I joined InnovoPro about a year ago after working for extensive period of time in academia at University of Tennessee, where I did research in food chemistry and biochemistry. They also worked for a large multinational company before joining InnovoPro. What attracted me to InnovoPro is something similar that I'm hearing, and which is very common to all of us, really passion for sustainability to help this planet and people on the planet to combat this climate change and to provide more food options for all of us in a more sustainable way. So InnovoPro is really focused on utilizing chickpea to extract protein that can be utilized in many different formats. So in meat alternatives, dairy alternatives, and egg alternatives. So we operate in all these categories of food, bringing this fantastic protein that is so functional and with very mild taste. The company became operational back in 2015. And we still have about 30 people, a little bit less, 27, but originated in Israel and now has subsidiaries in Canada and in US and me now in Belgium, right? And not only me, but more 3 or 4 people in Europe. So it's fantastic how a small company can grow and be present and truly be multinational, operating in 3 continents. We started with plant protein, with chickpea protein, but we are also looking into making value-added products for all our side streams so that we have zero waste. And utilizing this rotational crop, we are helping soil, but utilizing every part of this plant is really something that is going to provide food security and complete sustainability of the production.
Thank you, Lana. Guido mentioned, what he saw as opportunities in the United Arab Emirates and the region. I believe all the companies present here, perhaps except from MeaTech, but Guy, you can tell us whether you have any plans, are connected in one way or the other to the United Arab Emirates. Maybe it would be interesting for all of us to know a bit more how you see the UAE market and how do you see your technology and your companies can contribute to addressing the food security challenges that we've discussed earlier on, in particular for that region. I don't know whether Guido, you would like to say some more, or Lana, Miguel, Guy.
I can start if you don't mind. I'm feeling a bit at home now. So from Dubai. I think the ambitious plan of Global Food Security Index of 2051 being #1 for a country that, as of today, as everybody mentioned so far, is really in a position of struggling with importing raw materials and final food products, and of course, reducing food waste and consuming lots of energy in order to produce all the sustainable local production. I think this is an important point, and UAE need to be diversify the food production and the food sources, and clearly improve nutrition quality, but also activate legislation and policy to reduce waste, and of course help the go-to-market strategy of food innovators. So I think when we talk about UAE, certainly there are progresses that have been done in food safety, in micronutrients availability, nutritional standards, but certainly we suffer, you know, the impact of political commitment and possibility in terms of regulatory frameworks that started now. So we will see the effects down the line incredibly. And specifically for us, working with CO2 and very basic raw materials, so water, hydrogen, a source of nitrogen to kick off the bacteria fermentation. We really have all of this available in this area of the world. So this is the proof that alternative technology can really be taken off in places where you don't have produce availability, you don't have much arable land or water at your disposal. So I think this can be really the litmus test that we can engineer nutrition for deserted area or area that are not enjoying, you know, the availability and the possibility of a natural landscape like we have, for instance, in Europe. So we see the difference as well, like the fact that the traditional food value chain is traditionally more conservative and probably lazier in terms of food technology development that we would have in this part of the world. So I'm very proud to be here to help out to reutilizing CO2. So try to capture CO2 and utilize it for carbon to product processes like ours. Of course, reduce all the food waste. Even in terms of agricultural waste, we still need a source of nitrogen to kick off the appetite of bacteria during fermentation process. So that can be reutilized, for instance, from the dates industry or industry that are available, reducing the wastage of the agricultural produce, and clearly being extremely efficient in terms of industrial processes. Our bioreactors are very small and very modular. So we are aiming to develop a final product that is around 700, 800 liters. So we don't go volumes in the terms of bioreactor to produce efficiency, but we created and we're innovating on a continuous fermentation process. So contrary to batch fermentation where you need, you know, more time and large scale bioreactors, we're going to go continuous with smaller batches. That means that we can have a very decentralized production. We can create fermentation farms everywhere, even on a rooftop of a skyscraper at downtown Dubai, or in areas where now, you know, farmers are dedicated to very inefficient food solutions. So I think we can provide a very adaptable, modular, waste conscious and ready bulletproof, because we don't need many raw ingredients to produce the process. And of course, energy efficient, because without mentioning, our fermentation process is completely energy free up until the stage in which we need to basically filtrate or microfiltrate and extrude the product. So the entire fermentation process happens in a dark plant with no energy required, and the rest can be fueled by solar energy, which the UAE is investing a lot into. So we see that in this part of the world, you know, technology like ours can really be the key to turn on food availability, quality and safety and affordability of the final product.
Thank you, Guido. Miguel, or?
Well, I was going to add something. Thanks, Guido, for giving a very colorful explanation of what your business is doing and the impact on the region. Well, I'm going to borrow a saying from one of my colleagues on a previous startup that I founded. And this was about the time when blockchain was starting to appear as a technology. And he was the CEO, and he used to say, well, many people are talking about blockchain. In this case, I'll say, well, many people are talking about alternative proteins. At Eternal, we're doing it. And one of the things that I want to see and that I expect and hope to see more happening in the industry are more companies going from small scales and pilots and stealth modes into production. One of the things that we are super proud that we have achieved is to be able to move the business from a pilot into an industrial scale, and to be able to get as closer as we can to price parity on fungi fermentation, which is something that, again, the best forecast was going to happen in 2035. So it took an enormous amount of effort to reinvent, to understand the processes of fermentation, and to make sure that they were extremely efficient, and they were also using as much new technologies as possible to bring that parity that will deliver for someone to actually make a choice whether they want to use a protein that was going to be less sustainable or one that was not only sustainable, but similar to what Guido was saying, something that you can grow in a close environment. And part of that, again, we have done that, and maybe we have taken it a little bit to an extreme. We're talking about production of fresh protein in space. But, well, that sounds a bit crazy, and we're going to go more into detail later.
Yeah,
that
we want you to focus on the UAE and the Middle East.
Well, but that's the point. If you can produce protein on space, definitely you can look into areas that don't have the natural resources that you typically relate to an agricultural product. And being able to bring production on large scale of an affordable product of areas that don't have the amount of water that will make it possible to have traditional agriculture, won't have the landmass to do traditional agriculture, opens a complete new avenue for food sovereignty, which is one of the predominant goals of the region. So that's one of the things I want to support. There are several countries that are looking to work towards that. And I think alternative protein and the use of technology is the way in which that's going to start happening. I mean, farming has evolved from the very, I'll say, the very primal form that it took decades, thousands of years ago to where we are now. And I think that the focus needs to be how we can use technology to harness organisms that had nothing to do with what we're used to. So instead of trying to be, having a farm with a little bit of, cattle of one kind or another, I mean, the equivalent of that is going to be a production facility that will have several bioreactors utilizing the power and the efficiency that other types of organisms like fungi, microbes, insects, you name it, will be able to deliver what is needed in order to feed the world in regions that typically struggle with the resources.
Thank you so much, Miguel. Guy or Lana, do you want to comment on the opportunities in the UAE, the Middle East, or just
Absolutely.
Please.
Yes. I mean, being public, I will limit myself to what public companies can say on the future looking statements, but absolutely, we are talking with the Emirates about opening a facility. From my own perspective, that would be the best of everything, both sustainability and furthering the peace in making it the commercial ties between Israel and the Emirates is wow, something that will be amazing, I think. And I think the reasons to open a plant in the Emirates is obviously there. It's a question of financing, which I think is not an issue in the Emirates, and we are talking with the various stakeholders that could also translate into this could play in various ways, but absolutely we see the Emirates as a market for us to play in and to make our production facilities in the future.
Thank you. Lana, please. I just
yes.
want to mention one thing I hadn't said in the introduction, which I had in mind, is that in the GCC countries, currently about 20% of the population is 15 or below. So it means that we will also have the younger generations pushing the consumer trends towards all the things that we're talking about, more sustainability, which I think will make it for a great market. Lana?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to add, with all these great innovative proteins that are coming along, thinking of plant proteins, especially for something that is already growing in a region, is again adding to the variety of alternatives that we can use. So something that is plant-based, like from chickpea, it's already known into the diet and can be adapted faster, and everything else is coming. So there is no question that we will have many different options in future. Maybe just thinking about timing, something that is already on a menu, just in a different format, would be very easy to be accepted by wide consumers.
Actually, Lana, we talked about sustainability, but perhaps we can move to nutrition, because I know that your company is quite big on also showcasing the nutritional value of chickpea protein. Can you tell us a bit more? I believe you also produced a white paper recently.
Thank you. Yes, we are very proud. And there are several things in nutritional quality of the protein, right? It's amino acid composition, just what we have of all of these amino acids, and also how this protein is bioavailable. It's not only that it's there, but our organism has to digest it and to absorb it. And thinking about plants in general, there are common knowledge there are some anti-nutritional factors. So in producing plant-based proteins that can be used, again, in variety of food components, we need to think about all these aspects. So when we source our chickpeas, first of all, we source it with very specific types of chickpeas so that when we get this protein extracted, it has specific functionality, but also this amino acid composition is such that it has a very high PD-Cas level, or meaning it's very high protein quality. It has all essential amino acids, can support growth and maintenance of human body. It's very accessible, it's bioavailable, and it's 100% digestible, meaning that the processing of this protein, we extract it from seed, and thus, again, all this protein can be digested and absorbed, which is a very nice thing, consuming 100% of the protein that is in a meal. Beyond protein quality, we are talking about protein, but the good thing is beyond protein quantity and quality, there are many minerals in the product, specifically selenium. We all know that Brazilian nut is high in selenium, but chickpeas happen to be, and by extraction process, we capture all the selenium that is recognized for good immunity and boosting immunity system. So there is a lot of things that we are still exploring. The process, again, gets us a quality protein, removes all anti-nutritional factors, so we get the golden part of these chickpeas in the product.
Thank you. And maybe the question to others, Guido, Miguel, and Guy, how important is nutrition for you, in addition to sustainability and efficiency in the development of your proteins?
So if I can take this one, I would follow up on the nutritional aspects of what we're doing, because I think the bottom line is to produce nutrition per dollars, try to make the nutritional dollar more efficient possible in a world that will increase population, because now the product that we have on the shelf is very expensive, is very premium. We all experience buying from the usual suspects from Silicon Valley, or the new products coming from Israel and Singapore. They're not yet at the price point that we would love this product to be. And most of the cost has to be borne by the protein compounds, which is the most expensive ingredients normally in final products that go to shelf. So having a high nutritional value in the protein compound decrease the final product cost. So for instance, in our experience on microbial fermentation, we have an extreme efficiency in the protein content. So for us, the protein content, by the way, is a full amino acid train, so it's a complete protein. It's 80% of mass produce. And if you compare to other protein source, egg is 12, cow meat is 18, fish is around the same value, soy is around 40. So we double the mass-produced protein content of soy, which is already the most efficient that you can get on the market at this stage. The biological value of a microorganism with CO2 fermentation is between now 78 and 95 as a BV. So really between fish, beef, and milk, and a short distance to egg, which is great. And also we have a great possibility of having highly digestible products. So we have a digestibility score of almost 1. So it means that the digestibility aspect is resolved as well, because if you have a very nutritional protein compound and then it's not digestible, for instance, not just for the human body, but also for the feed, animal feed application, that will be a struggle. So clearly you want to be very efficient nutritionally, and you want to reduce the impact of nutritional value per dollar, which is the final bottom line of what we're trying to do. And I think this is an interesting aspect to see and to compare all the technology available. And if you allow me, Anne, to say something, because the listing that we want is that we innovators, we keep having a struggle or dilemma, or we engage into a solution against solution kind of war. We need all the technology available, and we need to be more agnostic technologically. There are in fermentation 88 companies in the world. I'm the only one in Italy. And this is a struggle. We need more companies that engage in food tech technology. We need to create an ecosystem. There is a Chinese venture capital called Dow Foods that they're really investing very agnostically in every possible technology that can allow the supply chain to flourish. So we need more protein from different technological sources. And then eventually 10, 20, 30, 50 years down the line, we will select what's the most efficient one and where do we need to put more investment into that. At this stage, for instance, in fermentation, only last year, capital invested around $1.5 billion. This is 1/3 of whatever happens in the previous 10 years. So we are clearly accelerating. We are clearly demonstrating that, for instance, microbial fermentation of fungi or microcellular is very efficient as a process and highly nutritional value, but still, to avoid bottlenecks, we need to improve all the different technology and be more agnostic and investing in different directions. So even for my venture capital friends that are listening here, I think creating a portfolio of solution is the best way possible. Investing in technologies that are highly efficient in terms of nutritional value and sustainability as well. But we're all friends in this game. And I think we need to start explaining to the consumer that probably the real enemy is the traditional farming or animal farming or traditional farming value chain that is not respecting the landscape and is not respecting the human body as well. We very take pride in the fact that we are GMO free, we are allergens free, we don't use any kind of chemicals in our process, we don't modify genetically the bacteria, we use a process in which we select the bacteria strains. So all of this, compared to any food that you find in the supermarket, is clearly organic compared to non-organic food, and is clearly cleaner for the human body, not just for the landscape, than the traditional food so conceived, including fruit and vegetables that you buy at the supermarket. So I think this is the speech that we need to do with the consumer and with the governmental entity about how clean this product is, how nutritional it is, how digestible it is, and how clean it is, even in terms of possible allergens or chemicals utilized in the process.
Thank you, Guido. Miguel?
I have just a brief story about, nutrition, going back to the core of what we do and the point, I think it has quite a lot of value. I think even emotional for us as a business. All our founders, or the majority of them, come from Latin America. And one of the things that made us start this business was going around the country and seeing poverty and finding that there was a huge sector of the population that could not afford to put food on the table. At the same time, you look into some of the more developed countries, and they have another issue with nutrition. You have an obesity, I'll say, pandemic that is probably killing as many people as we have seen in the last few years with COVID. If you compound what are the issues that come due to coronary disease or diabetes that are influenced by bad nutrition. So our CEO started this business speaking to a group of people, interdisciplinary team that involved from scientists to AI people. What is the most efficient way of feeding people in the world? How can we do it? So we found that there was this fungi that was very effective, very efficient, and very sustainable that had been explored. Patents had been abandoned for decades and nothing had been done with it for years. We spoke to some of the original researchers that were actually starting with that. We met with them in Finland from all possible places, which were one of the key researchers of this project that had started in the 60s with corn, ended. And I remember speaking to Marilyn Weave, she was one of the lead scientists, saying, I'm so glad to see that someone is taking this forward. Because what we have found was an organism that could efficiently produce a component that has already been found by Oxford University to be probably one of the healthiest products that you have in the market. I think probably in line with pulses, but with a overall better PDCAS score. So it's more digestible. It has a full amino acid profile, and it's again a non-GMO, fully organic product. It is not as easy to grow because you look into microscopic fungi, which indeed requires bioreactors, fermentation, scientists, and a lot of technology around it for it to grow. But the whole point of how we started our business was from the perspective of thinking, how can we reinvent nutrition so that in a couple of decades, when we actually get to the 10 billion, we know how we're going to be feeding the world and how we're going to be eliminating all these people that either because of lack of resources or excess of resources are having a nutrition problem. So this is at core of what we do and should be, I think, a focus of a lot more people, because paying attention to that component alone, be that on the alternative protein space, on the traditional farming, or from the tradition, or from every single food manufacturer, you could save lives. You could save millions of lives. So it is, I think, utmost important.
Thank you, Miguel. I don't know, Guy, if you want to comment on nutrition, but also there is another issue which has come up, and someone also asked this question in the chat. It's really about the cost and price point and affordability. You know, and I'm asking to maybe Guy, if you want to answer first, but also to our other panelists. You know, in your view, like how much are those products costing right now? And this is to answer Farah from the University of Minnesota. But also, what's your view of the way the sector will develop over the next few years or decade?
So just to touch on the nutrition, I think cultured meat as in general and MeaTech specifically is about three value added. One is the sustainability, the second is nutrition and health aspects, and the third one is about morale, or call it taking the animal out of the equation, and basically, which again for myself it's a really important topic. So when we think about nutrition, cultured meat will be with less antibiotics, less hormones, and with controlled growth environment. So we can even add or play around with the amount of fat we want. We can have more additives supplemented directly into the meat. And by that, basically creating the specific needs for tailor the product for the end customer's needs. Your question about cost, that's indeed a major challenge for the industry. One of those drivers for the cost, the main driver, is actually the growth media. And here we see fermentation being part of the ecosystem and bringing really solutions to the meat to the cultured meat industry. So we are talking with many of the fermenters in the space for them to supply us with some of those growth factors that we need. And the way we see it is that as we see supply getting increasing, and as we see the industry growing and maturing, we believe that the supply of growth factors will also increase, and by that cost will drive down. You have to remember that this industry started from the medical health industry. The technology has been there for many years, but the cost and regulation and moving from health to food, you need to think about higher volumes and different constraints such as scale and price. And we believe and what we've seen is also that the price have been going down drastically, and we believe that this trend will continue.
Thank you, Guy. Anyone else would like to comment on cost?
If I can add, going to the MEA cost, which I already stressed that we are looking for solutions that clearly decrease the nutritional value per dollar. But I think on the fermentation aspect, because we understand that fermentation is technology that's been known, for thousands of years. And I'm speaking from a region that, mastered this process at least 5,000 years ago, like the Egyptian with beers, for instance, to make an example that everybody is familiar with. But all of the total fermentation volumetric capacity in the world at this stage, which is around 62 million liters, only 2 are devoted to downstream application for food. So this is really what the bottleneck needs. So as a guy was mentioning before, in cultivated meat, it's clearly an accelerator for a certain vehicle that you need in the process. For us, means the production of the intact cell or the final protein compounds. But still, of this 2 million liter capacity, we need to expand and we need to go to a different level. Once that would be done, of course, there would be a decrease in the overall price point all across the board between plant-based, cultivated meat and traditionally biomass or precision fermentation processes. So on the engineering side and the bioreactor side, we need to make an effort to produce more efficient technologies, like we are investing and we're developing what we call Infinity, which is the first continuous fermentation utilizing CO2 in the world. And this, of course, creates some efficiency. We account now at this stage in TRL5 for around 3 times the efficiencies of traditional fermentation in batch. But clearly, increasing the fermentation volumetric capacities was one key aspect to reduce the costs. And of course, having technology that utilize raw ingredients that are available and not that expensive. Avoiding wastage of all kinds, for instance, recycling water in the process, or having plants that consume less energy, or they are less energy intense than others. So this is my point. We landed on a price point at this stage that is very low. I can declare at our TRL level that we are around $3 to $5 per kilos of the final protein compound. So extremely appealing from a price point standpoint with our technology. But I think the real true topic is to address infrastructural needs on the fermentation side, for instance, that we will be helping the shortage of available fermentation manufacturing plants across the board, useful for all the technology we are discussing today.
Thank you.
Lana, I don't know if you want to add something, Lana, or otherwise I'll just chip in quickly, but I'm afraid I've been taking quite a bit of the time of talking.
Miguel?
Yeah, maybe just as a quick comment, something that we all have this in mind. At this point, price structure is created in one way, but we also see that there is a growing trade in carbon, right? Because there are some emissions on carbon and companies will be charged on extreme carbon emissions. So if the price in future will include greenhouse gas emissions, then the price may change really, and we'll see this shift in much increased price for animal-based products. So there is a hidden price, hidden cost of these animal-based proteins and products that you're not seeing yet, but this definitely may come very, very quickly. And I agree with everything that is being said, just adding this to the conversation.
Thank you.
And my comment was going to be very similar and hopefully brief. I think there is a price structure that, as Lana mentioned, is hidden. So the cost is paid by someone. So the total cost of a product is the cost that it has to the producer, some that is transferred to the user when people say, well, okay, we can sell you the completely exploitative chocolate, or if you want to pay more, here's the really fair trade, but we'll sell you both. That's not a real choice. So you have a total cost that is partly transferred into the user. Additionally, you have an extra cost that is transferred into the environment. So if your food production methods are not sustainable, there's a cost to the environment, to the people who live in a specific place. They'll have higher emissions, they'll have more contamination that is implicit there. So you still have those costs there. So I think where people are talking about price parity, where you're comparing, that's a panacea that everyone's looking like, where there will be no choice, well, no monetary choice between alternative protein, sustainable protein, or regular protein. But that is, okay, what if this is kicked down a little bit further so someone picks it up? Soy protein now is selling at, I know, under $1 per kilo. That is very hard to compete with. But then what is the price of soil depletion, the price of the carbon footprint of moving that product around the world, the cost of water to keep the crops? I mean, that's not part of a price because it's put into a lot of different buckets that other people are paying. So again, if you add all that cost and you do an actual, you do a stack, you end up finding that some of the so-called expensive products are in line with what we're already paying. It's just that they don't come all from the same pocket.
Thank you. Talking about bottlenecks, and perhaps this is to continue, Miguel, and to talk about a different issue, that of food safety. I know that the fungi you use to create your protein has been validated as safe by the Food and Drug Administration and also by the European Food Safety Institution. Perhaps it would be interesting for others listening to know a little bit more about the process you went through and others as well, you know, how important, how complicated it is to make one of your ingredients or your technology validated as food safe by the relevant authorities.
Sure. There are a couple of things I would say on that. One is that we were, I would say, strategic, albeit lucky, that we were standing on the shoulders of giants. We followed on a research that was validated for decades. The production of the main organism that you use today, which is Fusarium venenatum, is a particular microscopic fungi that actually predates the concept of novel food as part of a legislation. So this is for how long this has been on the market. That opened numerous doors for us and saved us an enormous amount of time that we did not have to put into the process of demonstrating the safety of the organism, the way in which we produce it, and then going through the hurdles and most of the time that it takes to do all these processes. I mean, doing anything that has to do with food innovation, it's expensive because it takes both time and money. And well, time is at the end money for a company. So word of advice for people working in new products, please be aware of the lengthy time and pains a mere experience going through new jurisdictions and are not familiar with a particular ingredient. We were lucky that that particular path that we were actually venturing through had been transited by other companies before. There was a body of knowledge of the organism that made in turn a lot easier to demonstrate to the regulators that what we are bringing into the market is the same really good quality ingredient, but produced in a way that is more efficient. So the cost is lower and the cost to environment is lower. However, we actually made a decision of steered away of what would otherwise be a GMO product or a redesigned product that, again, could have been more efficient, but was going to delay or go to market by maybe a year or two. So again, I guess that there are trade-offs and that's one of the sometimes untold costs of innovation, which is then to go into the pains that it takes to explain some regulators what the food is. I mean, even with the FDA, the first time they tried to import our product, they were saying, okay, is this a vegetable? No, not really. Is this an animal? No, not really. Then it's not us. And we're like, I am sorry. That's a complete other kingdom that you're missing out. I mean, we then got to realize that the US understanding of fungi actually falls within what they see as veggies, although it's definitely not that. But these are the same things that we found in other jurisdictions. Going to Japan, we found that the product, although fermentation in Asia has been existing for years, the product itself, that fungi for human consumption, didn't exist. So there was even a question of how do you label this when you import it? So again, it is great to start with something that you can do if your plan is to go to market very quickly. It can save an enormous amount of time and effort. And that's the only thing that I can do to other startups. And I hope more people are exploring that and look into different and new ingredients, but being thoughtful of the time and energy it will take to then go through the processes in the variety of jurisdictions that you want to go to market. Probably it's better to explore first where you want to go to market and then find what you're going to be doing in terms of regulatory work. So by the time that you're even at the scale volume, you have done the work that you need to do to get to the food producers.
Thank you, Miguel. Is it the experience of others as well? Anyone else who would like to comment on validation processes and food safety?
I think I feel quite this topic, because there is an element of frustration that comes with dealing with the regulatory bodies. For instance, there are differences in the approach from US to Europe to other areas of the world. In US, it's very easy to obtain, and many fermentation derived ingredients company obtained a non-question letter from FDA, so defining the ingredients as generally recognized as safe, so getting the GRAS authorization. If you look at what the FDA associate to GRAS, you want to probably close your eyes, because there is a list of things that don't spare the same spot, like organic nutrients. But at the same time, when you go to Europe, on the opposite side, you have a absurd novel food regulation that require risk assessment conducted by the European Food Safety Authority, pre-market authorization at the central EU level, and the number of commission requiring approval across all the 27 EU countries for something that it's not genetically modified. So we go into a pattern in which the investigation is done on the products produced by the good guys, while we let the food industry continue utilizing the E-series toxic ingredient in small quantity that they use, preservatives, GMO ingredients, chemicals, and all sorts. So I think a massive debate needs to reach the public opinion, explaining that there are some new organic sources of nutrition that they can substitute many products on the market and can help the food industry to be more sustainable and more likable to the human body than the current products that is on shelf. And this is something that needs to be taken, very seriously. I really appreciate what Israel or Singapore are doing. I had several conversations with different bodies in the UAE as well, and I appreciate that we want to push forward and move into a public debate and a governmental push on novel food regulation. And I think this is very much due. And of course, US and Europe are the major markets where traditionally, you protect interest and GDP and job related to that of the traditional food production value chain. And we understand that, but we also need to help the big giant in food manufacturing to convert into more sustainable technology and to start acting as strong lobbies against the people, because we need food safety at first and food sustainability. That's all we need. And the frustration that derives from dealing with the novel food regulation is top priority of all of us working in the sector, and it's what keeping us up at night, without addressing the second part, which is at the bottom of the chain, which is labeling, because assessing which kind of guidance we can have on labeling the products and the nomenclature, what we can define as sausage, a burger, or milk, a yogurt, while clearly all the alternative protein or alternative novel food manufacturer we're trying to evoke the sense of familiarity in the food for the lack of better description. So at times, we have blockades coming from the institutional body, specifically European Parliament, in which the meat terminology, for instance, which I'm not a big fan of, I'm not a vegan or vegetarian advocate, but still, I thought that was a very petty labeling assessment by the European Parliament, and I think it blocked the market and it constricted adoption. So this is something that needs to be public, need to be discussed with consumer, with the people, not just with the governmental entities, even when it comes to labeling and nomenclature, which is not, they become marketing and commercial tools, but they're very, very important in amplify the adoption, hence reducing the prices, hence changing the world for the better.
Thank you, Guido.
And maybe just to add something on what Guido is saying, which is, I feel what you're saying, and this is really an unfortunate situation that I really believe will change very soon. I want to be optimist. So governments and EFSA would have their regulation requirements, and let's respect that. Okay, so they have their regulations how to do it. But what is unfortunate and maybe unfair, pushing all the cost, and cost is easily over $1 million, $2 million to do all the requirements that are necessary. but pushing that cost back to startups and food tech companies. I think that the solution would be so much easier if governments really invest in these tests and these studies, what are needed, and really help food tech company and the whole growing industry of innovation in food to qualify and to check whatever needs to be checked. So everybody's satisfied, their data, we all know what's going on, and they'll be much faster than in way that regulatory bodies would like to be done, and we'll have food security on safe and quality level.
Thank you. I just want to mention to everyone, we have another 15 minutes. I see some hands raised, but please, if you could use the chat function, if you have any questions for our panelists. Following from what you've just said on food safety, what do you think are the other factors driving consumer adoption? Obviously, regulation is key, but what else do you see as challenges or opportunities on the consumer part?
That's an easy one. As we're talking about food, it's first and foremost about taste. We see it with the plant-based alternatives today that are challenging the legacy meat market with novel products. And we see that in the reports of the companies, the likes of Beyond Meat and such, that are really changing the market and really brought the market attention. But you know, you try it once, you try it twice. If you don't care about the added values and you just compare it to the taste, you will not buy it again. In some cases, okay, I'm not saying anything wrong about these companies. They are fantastic and I love them, but I mean, the reality is that those who want to try it, most of them don't return because it's just not good enough. It's just not the real thing. It's just not tasty enough, to simplify it. So that's the main challenge. And I think everything else comes later. I mean, you can have it at a fantastic price, but if it's not tasty, the consumer will not eat it again.
Thank you. Anyone else? Miguel?
I think it's something also, I mean, you have flavor, and that's funny because in mature markets are used to being vegetarian, and we have seen that, particularly talking to consumers in Asia. I mean, if you go to India, for the majority of the subcontinent, there's nothing new about being vegetarian. So that's the way they do things. So if you can't offer good flavor and price, then they're going to buy from you. But in addition, I think, particularly for us in alt proteins, there are certain questions that come in terms of psychological barriers that people have. I don't think many people will stop to see what flavor it has insect protein without going into the fact that it's coming from a black soldier fly larva, and no one likes the idea of eating a burger made of worms. However, probably at the flavor profile will be fine. Now, is it something that most of the Western society will be comfortable with? Not really now. And even subtle differences they have. I mean, we talk a lot about fungi. There was at some point a lawsuit about mislabeling because microscopic fungi technically can be classed as mold. And while we might be happy to see mold in cheese, especially if it's a Roquefort, I don't think anyone will bother about that. It is not the thing that most people associate with a food ingredient. So this element of familiarity and making sure that new texts applied to food find a way to describe food in a way that is appealing is almost as important as flavor, because if you cross those barriers, people wouldn't even give it a go. They'll be like, what? Made of bugs? No, not for me. And again, sadly, I say this with a bit of irony, because I know that second to probably macros and fungi, insects are the most efficient way of transforming any type of energy into protein.
And insects are actually eaten in most parts of the world, except from the Western world, where we ate less insects than in other regions. Anyone else would like to comment on the consumer part?
I'd love to follow up on this last part of the conversation by Miguel, because clearly there is an element of labeling to help people to frame what they're going to put in their body. And I think that's an important human necessity of translating what visually I can see or I can read about into what I'm going to absorb. So I think that is important. The major driver was at the beginning the anti-cruelty kind of market driver. So people started drinking animal-free milk, and we saw different companies that are starting from Oatly downwards, that has been very successful in delivering alternative animal-free milk. But then all of a sudden we discovered that thousands of gallons are necessary to produce an almond. So almond milk was actually way less sustainable than traditional cow milk. So that argument, while it's good on an ethical perspective, because you don't need to kill or enslave any animal to get the protein compound out of the product, at the same time you have an element of unsustainability of the chain. So all of a sudden sustainability became a topic, and I think that is another good strong market driver for people to start going into alternative. But I think the major trap into this is to create an aura of conflict. I think the industry, all of us at the table, we need to avoid shrinking ourselves, creating niches of consumers or markets when there are not. We are trying to feed the world. We are trying to feed everybody. If you start raising barriers of anti-cruelty, vegan, these labels, they do only one job, which is reducing into niche your market and creating a polarization of opinions about products. So I think this is a major debate that we need to have as an industry, and start talking with the food manufacturer as a whole. Try to avoid negative language, try to avoid segregation and polarization of public taste, because this is not helping us to save the world and to create more affordable nutrition. This is actually keeping us in our little segments and raising barriers that are not necessary at this stage. Whatever is attractive for consumer, we change region by region. As someone was mentioning before, Asia is more prone to vegetarian or vegan alternative because traditionally that has been so. We have been, deviated at the beginning of the alternative protein journey from the companies based out of California, because meat-based burgers, sausages, steaks, this is what everybody was talking about, which is common in a part of the West, but is not typical food for the rest of the world. So again, that's another element of creating a niche when you don't need to create a niche. And so, yeah, we need to have a public debate about how do we expand the palette, and how do we prompt people, instead of mimicking tastes, how do we prompt people to think of new tastes? Because that's the beauty of what we're doing. We're creating tastes that they never existed before in traditional food. If someone remember the molecular cuisine revolution at one point in the late 80s, early 90s, new technologies that were coming from labs and new flavors, a new texture has been created, and people were going to restaurants paying lots of money to have a dinner that was done, in a sort of kitchen lab, and there were the palettes and the flavors available weren't comparable to anything else you knew, and you were surprised and refreshed by the experience. So I think we need to also try to avoid mimicking products that exist already or flavors that exist already, and create new flavors and new experiences for people to make them, engage with something that is refreshing and powerful.
Thank you, Guido. Unfortunately, we're almost done with the time. Since we're talking about going big, and since my earlier question, Guy, was too simple, I have one question for you, and then I would like to wrap up with all of our speakers. But you're one of, MeaTech is one of the first companies in the cellular meat field to have gone public. Can you perhaps tell us what were your motivations, and if you have any advice and suggestions for others, any take from that move?
Sure. Yes, that is a tougher question. It's not obvious for companies in our stage to go public. I think it has lots of pros, it has lots of cons. One of the big things about it is that we, as a relatively young company, by going public, we kind of caught up with the more mature companies that started in 2016 or earlier, and we managed to catch up with them, just in terms of kind of awareness to the brand. The second thing, the practical thing that it meant for us was the access to capital. We managed to raise 55 million to date. And the third thing, we have a coin where we can do M&A with, and exactly what we did in Belgium. So the acquisition of our wholly owned subsidiary, Piece of Meat, based in Antwerp, Belgium, was partially financed by our stock, which I think is much more challenging for a private company to do a stock per stock acquisition. So that was the driver. It came from the experience of the co-founders who've done this before with other companies. They realized that if there is an opportunity to go over the VC at the early stage and go straight to public funding, and there was an appetite for that, and we see the reasoning for that, then it makes sense. But for sure, it's not for anyone, for everyone at every stage. I think being public means also that it's like it's demanding much more from the team. You have to be very transparent on what you do. You cannot bullshit the audience, because it's just not. You have to stick to your words, or you get sued by the investors. So you cannot overpromise. And at the same time, it brings you the awareness, and it brings you the credibility, and gives you the access to capital, to in a nutshell.
Thank you, Guy, and wishing you a lot of success. And to all of you, one last question before giving back the floor to Max. If you had one advice to give to your younger self, what would it be, embarking on this food tech adventure? Lana, do you want to start?
Yes. Well, I would just thinking about my background, going from academia to large corporate, and now in startup and food tech, it's really being very flexible and being able to adapt to different situations, to look what's going on and to understand the environment, right? So things do change, and having our knowledge and being open and adaptable, that's the way to go.
Thank you. Miguel?
It's a tricky one. I mean, I guess that this venture got me being the sixth startup that I put together. I mean, I already had a couple of exits. So when I heard about the project, I loved it. And I have been lucky that I have been able to choose what projects to be involved with over the last decade or so. So that's I'm not too sure if I had a recommendation to my younger self. Probably would have been that even if it's a moonshot, but if there's purpose and a good story on the company, just to champ on it, even if there's no clear exit or clear horizon at the moment where you're joining. Because again, I noticed that on my previous ventures, I was more focused on understanding the financial aspect of it, whereas more and more looking to stories that touch me a little more closely, where I feel that I'm just building something that I can be proud, that I can just, I don't know, go back to my family in a couple of years, can go and talk to my son and say, look, I'm doing something that is good for the world. I'm doing something that hopefully is going to save lives. I'm doing something that I can get up in the morning, and if I'm not going to be at home because I have meetings late in the evening, it's going to be for the greater good, something that I like, and probably something that I should have done earlier. I mean, I'm doing it now. I hope that I'll be able to catch up, but yeah, that probably will be what I would say to the younger self.
Thank you, Miguel.
I relate to that very much. I think exactly with doing something that is for a good cause. So I would have probably left banking 5 years earlier and go to enter this industry.
Thank you. Guido, you have the last word.
I would prefer to, instead of the younger me, which is already gone and dusted, I would have as a recommendation for the younger me and my two kids. I have two sons, 8 and 5 years old, Romeo and Harvey. And I think the recommendation for them is to try to experience themselves what's good for the environment, good for the planet, good for their communities, and don't be trickled down by the mainstream media that can reach them and can deviate their attention on, because we are like never before today bombarded by misinformation, and we struggle to decipher what's going on around us. So when it comes to nutrition, food, and environment, I would suggest them to make their own journey, assess their own sources of information, engage with different people coming from different areas of the world, and travel and eat different things, because this is the major amplifier of potential that we humans have. So that's a recommendation. As per my career, I'm very happy that I invested so much in understanding from many multinationals how to do things, even the wrong way, because out of this experience now I can translate, a more efficient and suitable plan and way forward for all of us. So giving back to community and sharing from even my mistakes and the sides that I picked that at times weren't for the good. I worked for a company in the past that were arresting human development or killing the planet in many different ways, and I learned a lot, and now it's time to translate all this learning into a new green field for humanity.
Thank you, Guido, and thank you to all of you. Thanks for sharing those inspiring thoughts, and thank you also Aurora and Max for the organization and the FoodTech Challenge. Max, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, everyone, for joining. It was very, very insightful conversation and very, very wise words to close it as well. So, thank you for everyone who's been listening. Just a few. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
I take that as a yes. A few words on the next session we'll be hosting on the 12th of May around food waste and supply chain challenges, still focused on the UAE and the Middle East. We have a very exciting panel of speakers as well that will be announced soon. A few words as well about the FoodTech Challenge, because I know we have a lot of entrepreneurs in the call as well. If you want to apply, if you have any questions, you can go on the FoodTech Challenge website and scan this code to actually go straight into the application process. And should you have any questions about forward fooding, what we do, or if you have any questions you'd like to ask the speakers, I know we didn't have the chance to cover all the questions. Please feel free to email us, and we will make sure to transfer them. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining. Guido, Lana, Guy, Miguel, thank you very much for coming tonight.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Good being with you.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you.